We do want this to be more of a conversation rather than just us talking at you. So thank you so much for your participation. And we are going to ask people to join us as panelists, if that's possible, so that we can all see each other rather than just a few of us on the screen. I'm going to go ahead and start out with a framing statement, just let you all know how this idea came to be and what we're hoping to talk about today, and then we're going to jump into some questions. So, hey everybody, my name's Laura Nash. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a dual graduate student in critical studies and applied craft and design. I mostly play tabletop games, although I've also been playing a lot of mobile games this year. They've been one of my coping mechanisms in 2020. For me, games are a form of community building. I enjoy strategy and solving puzzles, but I'm usually more interested in the social aspect of playing games. I appreciate games for their ability to facilitate social interactions, creating a framework of rules and expectations. As someone with social anxiety, this takes away the pressure of performing in a free-form setting. Games remove the need for individuals to take on the role of compelling conversationalist. I have a couple groups of friends that have grown around playing games together. It's not all we do together, but it's a large part of what we do together. The games we play include everything from trivia and party games to social deduction and resource management games, and many more. We've even managed to continue playing games together throughout the pandemic using tools like Game Board Arena, Tabletop Simulator, and Discord. And these are friends I know I can turn to with needs beyond socializing, the kind of friends who will help you move or celebrate accomplishments with you or support passion projects. This semester, I've been exploring game design in my studio practice, and I've become particularly interested in how other people experience games. So I want to say thank you for joining us today. I'm looking forward to hearing your experiences and thoughts, and I hope you'll get something out of this conversation as well. I'm going to put links for a communal Google Doc and drawing board into the chat, so if people feel like contributing by putting resources or thoughts in the Google Doc or on the drawing board as the discussion progresses, that would be great. These are additional ways to participate if they're modes that appeal to you, but also don't feel pressured to use them. And I'm going to pass over to Elizabeth for our first question.
Hi, everyone.
Oh, sorry. One other thing was if folks want to use the raise hand function, that'll be an easier way to manage conversation with this size group, I think. Go ahead.
Cool. Hi, everyone. I'm Elizabeth. I use she, her pronouns. I am a second-year student in the Critical Studies MA program. I'm writing my thesis on Hallmark Christmas movies. I have been playing video games since I was in middle school. It was kind of an alienating experience when I was younger because I was the only young girl I knew who played video games. So then when I was in my 20s, I did a bunch of comics about that experience and spent some time kind of vaguely adjacent to the indie games industry community before leaving it, but it's still playing games and knowing people from games is still a big part of my life. So that is me. And I'm going to get started with a question that might seem like a bummer, but I think that it will get everybody thinking just about how games and care can be connected, even in ways that we don't really expect. So how, over the course of the pandemic and the varying levels of quarantine that we've all been in for the last 8 or 9 months, a lot of people have been using games in certain ways to connect, to take care of themselves. And so we were wondering if we could start off by talking about how the pandemic has changed your relationship to games, or has it? Yeah. And you can just raise your hand if you see that function, or even if it makes sense and nobody is, it doesn't get too disorganized, you can just unmute and say stuff.
Well, I wanted to say, I don't think my relationship with games has like changed a lot, but I noticed that I have been like playing games a lot more recently, just because of like the lack of things to do outside now and like wanting to connect with friends more. So I think I've been playing games more like this semester than I have like past semesters, just for that reason.
Hi, can you all hear me? Okay, cool. Hi, I'm Hanny. I'm a grad student over at Virginia Tech. And over there, we've honestly, the big change with the pandemic has really been, I'm disabled. A lot of my friends are disabled in different ways. And so for us, online games and things like tabletop roleplay have always been, or like tabletop simulator have been core parts of our social life and core parts of our like community for a very long time. And it's the big change has really been in the friends who historically were like, nah, I'd never really want to do that. I would always much rather do something else. Now kind of like coming into getting to onboard people who have historically never been interested into this thing that has been an aspect of my community for a very long time, which is cool.
Hi, my name's Al. I'm a second year grad student at PNCA. I'm in the Applied Craft and Design department. And I moved into a new place like 2 months ago where I have 4 other roommates, and they had games here already. So having all these people here that I'm quarantined with and these games, it was a perfect combination. So I've been playing a lot more tabletop games than I have since I was like a kid. And it's great because I miss it and I like not staring at a screen. That has been, but yeah, that's basically it. I like card games generally, for drinking games sometimes too, that kind of thing. Anyway, stop there.
Drinking games are a good category of games that we don't usually think of when we think of being a gamer or whatever. I hadn't even thought of that.
I think for me, as somebody who primarily has played board and card games, I've switched over to digital games in a way that I hadn't experienced before. Like I mentioned in my statement at the beginning, things like Board Game Arena, and that's actually had me participating in games on a different level, because before maybe I only played them with my friends, but now I'm more open to playing them with whoever will join a random game online, and also finding ways to still play with friends, like Jackbox has been a big one, or I've only played Among Us once, but I know that's huge right now. And I've seen so many memes about Among Us on the internet recently.
Yeah, Jackbox has been a big one for me too. I don't know if y'all play Jackbox, but it's great.
Yeah, for people who don't know, Jackbox is has a variety of different types of games. There's like trivia or Pictionary type games.
it's like a party game pack, but kind of with some personality. Yeah, they're really fun. I've been playing that for years, since even before the pandemic.
Oh, cool. I didn't even know it existed before.
We used to play it in person, but like there's no difference in the experience if you're playing remotely versus in person. So yeah. What about like ways that people have y'all been using games in kind of unusual ways at all? I know that like towards the beginning of the pandemic, when the new Animal Crossing came out, people were like throwing events in their Animal Crossing towns, and other people would go to them, or they would have meetups there. And I read about one person putting on like an art show in their Animal Crossing town. Has anyone done any kind of like events like that?
I guess I can chime in again.
Go ahead.
I mean, so I used to be heavily involved in the grad student government over here at Virginia Tech-ish, and one of the things that we had done a little bit of in order to help, with building graduate student community at a university, it's a very difficult endeavor in the first place, because a lot of people are older. And then when you have the pandemic going, the idea of introducing people to new people who they haven't met is a very difficult one. And so for running elections for the following year, one of the things that we actually did was we had deliberately did Jackbox party games with like the candidates, and then use the audience role to open that up to more people, to sort of like participate in that regard and get to kind of get more of a feel for what people were like. And obviously there's not a Jackbox party game of like, how would you advocate for better graduate student treatment at a university, but at least there was some aspects of that.
Well, they could make t-shirt slogans for there's one game where you create t-shirts together.
Yep.
I actually heard about some schools that hosted their graduation ceremonies on Animal Crossing. And I think I heard about a couple of weddings and also like concerts.
But otherwise, if people's habits have not changed that much, or if they've just become more, they just play games more, or with more people, then that's totally valid as well. And we can totally move on to the next question or next topic of discussion.
I can throw in a little bit of discussion about some of the previous question, just how has my experience with games changed during the pandemic. I found that it's been a nice way to reconnect with some friends that I actually hadn't spoken to or hadn't been in contact with for several years prior to the pandemic. Actually kind of was able to reconnect with an old group of friends from undergrad and now have a semi-regular game night, online virtual game night, which I'm actually going to be going to right after this. So it's been a nice way to not only reconnect or stay connected with my current group of friends, but to reconnect with some old people. So.
That's really nice to hear. Thanks, Kate. So the next question is, how do community and care figure into your experience of playing games? And this is both as, for example, how you have created community and systems of care within your game playing community, or do you play games alone? Do you not have community about games? That's something I'm curious about too. And then also, like, where within games do you see content regarding community and care? So both structures around game playing and then content within games that has to do with care.
In terms of building community, similar to what Hani said earlier, we run a bi-weekly board game night virtually for grad students. And we've seen good participation from new grad students who haven't met anybody in person yet. So it's been a way for them to meet peers and classmates, at least virtually.
I feel like video games as self-care is like such a, it's almost like a cliche now. It's like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go just play video games for however many hours, to kind of escape from the capitalism trap of feeling like you need to be doing something productive all the time. And then like when Laura and I were talking about this in advance, we were, it's like you get to that part and then you're like, but video games are also capitalism. So it's a little bit, it becomes complicated, because it's like, even if you are using video games as self-care, there's always the questions of like, who has access to those? And meaning in like, in terms of ability, in terms of finances, in terms of time. But yeah, so it's not uncomplicated, but I think that people, especially when we talk about people playing video games more or playing board games online more now than they did before, I think it's definitely being used as self-soothing.
I only ever really play games by myself, and I feel like it's probably because I had some like negative experiences on Xbox Live as a tween. But I like definitely, for me, it's very much like it's when I don't want to be like around anyone, or I mean, I live alone, so now it is like sometimes when I want to be around people but not have to actually like deal with real people. I also just think it's like a good outlet for rage. And I didn't play like a ton of, video games, at least like the violent ones, but I haven't really done like online gaming. It's like in terms of board games though, and I feel like that's interesting, but I'm also kind of scared of people, and I think that also probably plays a role in it. But I like to do it by myself. It's kind of like my me time.
Carly, that's the same for me usually. I grew up and I didn't know anyone else other than my brother who played video games, so it became this thing that I did by myself. And then nobody like, I just didn't, I don't know, it just never connected with me, the online thing. So now is like one of the first times during the pandemic, like when I would meet up with people in Animal Crossing, it's like some of the first like online gaming that I've ever done, even though I've been playing video games for like 25 years.
The game that I keep thinking about, even though I've never played it before, but I've heard about it, is that Stardew Valley that involve. I think it sounds a little bit like Farmville to me, where the purpose of the game is to cultivate crops, and so I see that as a game that is dealing with themes of care and cultivation. And then I think there's also something about like building relationships. I don't know if there's anybody here who has actually played Stardew Valley. I'd love to hear from you on that topic.
I play Stardew Valley. It soothes me. And it is like a lot of mundane like farming stuff, and you build up like relationships and can get married and have like children. But it's not super involved. It's just kind of like they show up, the children, which is nice. But yeah, it is definitely about like care. And if you don't water your crops, you die, and then you're sad. Or if like you don't feed your animals, they get sick. So it is like very like through like mundane routine, but it is care. And you definitely have to like cultivate, and the people have gifts that they like and don't like it's actually very intricate. But I don't know if anyone else plays Stardew Valley, but if you guys are into like Animal Crossing, or like I played like Harvest Moon on like the GameCube, it's kind of similar. And you can do it with other people too, but I also like, once again, I want my weird farm to be like my weird farm.
Carly, I also play Stardew Valley. I love it so much. I have never been someone who plays games on my own, and a friend like loosely suggested that I try out Stardew Valley at the very beginning of COVID time, and I was like, oh, sure, maybe. And she was like, no, really, like I think that this would be relaxing and you would really like it. And then I feel like I totally understood why people play games, like just from like a day of playing Stardew Valley, because I joined this late. I'm sorry if someone already said this, but like the me time aspect of it, like I'm very invested in my farm, and not because I am making gold on my farm or like getting money, but yeah, I'm not obligated, like my little character isn't obligated to interact with anyone else. It's very much like you can choose if you want to or not. You can just like casually farm some beets for an entire day if you want to. It's great.
That actually reminds me of a game I used to play in undergrad. That was like it was just a Facebook game that was called Happy Aquarium. And the entire purpose of the game was to clean the fish's aquarium and feed them, and that's all you did, but you got points for doing it.
I mean, did anybody have like a Tamagotchi like back in the day? That whole thing is just like a little care game you carry around. Or like the spin-offs, like the Gigapet.
Furbies are wild too. I don't know if that's really like
No,
a
that
game in the same way,
absolutely
but
that was the same era, and also it's something that you have to take care of, right? Or you're supposed to somehow.
Go for it, Hani. I saw your hand raised.
I definitely agree about Stardew Valley being very nice in that kind of way. If you're looking for sort of other games that have a similar community-centric sort of dynamic, there's this weird old game called A Tale in the Desert, which is by this point a like community-owned and run online, I guess, MMO, but it is a 100% cooperative, like quasi-ancient Egypt sort of game where like it all centers around sort of like the building of community in different regions, doing different things, and on like building up your own sort of community infrastructure for providing for each other's like needs, and for sort of like building each other's capacity to do things. So you're all sort of like, you might be like trying to take care of sheep, but then also like collectively researching as a bigger group, some new technology for the processing of whatever to do something. And it really centers around like a lot of the goals for your characters and the ways you grow in the game really require like collective organizing and action across this like wide group of people. all the way to the point of there being like internal social elections and stuff like this. So it's a very cool, and then because it's fully cooperative and there's no such thing as like, you know, you like literally cannot hurt somebody else. So then there's very much this element of like, well, we got to learn to live with each other and we got to sort of like learn to navigate these different dynamics. And it's very nice because it's, you can't starve, right? And that's a very important difference versus the real world, right? Like that's a very important difference because then it means that it's still an escape, even then when you get to engage with other people in that way. But yeah, I just wanted to shout that one out there. I think it's, I'd say, I'll just say the name in chat.
That's awesome. I'd never heard of that one. That reminds me of something that I've been thinking about as I've been working on game design, that like so many games do revolve around, you know, harming other people or like war sort of formats. And it's just nice to hear about games that think about other forms of play. I'm also thinking about collaborative games and what the dynamic is within collaborative games. I think one of the most familiar ones that people tend to know about is Pandemic, which sort of had a weird re-energizing around people wanting to play the game in March when COVID began, like kind of a strange phenomenon where, like, I don't know, maybe people felt like they had more power about the pandemic if they were able to play a game where they're curing a pandemic. If anybody else has thoughts about collaborative games, I'd be interested to hear that.
Although it's not a traditional game, one of the fun ones that I've been playing has been a collaborative jigsaw puzzle online that I've been finding, like, you can work with a group
That's so cool.
to solve a puzzle, and it really, I find that collaborative games really do tend to kind of help build that sense of collaboration, that especially in light of a pandemic, like we all need to work together. And it really helps to kind of reinforce that. And I think there's something so delightful about not necessarily trying to always be better than your opponent, but able to say that by working together, you can actually accomplish something really cool.
Has anybody had to have, like, speaking of collaborative games, has anyone had to have like a local D&D game move remote? Because I know, like, my D&D game kind of petered out like a few months before the pandemic, but I know people who have like been playing D&D regularly for years and have had to move that online for the first time. And I'm wondering if anyone has that experience or something similar, because that's another kind of like where it's not competing. It's supposed to be like a group co-op thing, but
It looks like CR is raising their hand. Yeah, go for it.
Can you guys hear me? Can you hear me? All right, perfect.
Yes.
So actually, oddly enough, I am here with my girlfriend. She is CR. She's Courtney Reese. But I'm a dungeon master, and I had to take the entire process of converting from in-person to online. I do want to say, in terms of you talking about before, having it as a game that can be about care and concern, that's basically been the ethos of what it is, because as you're trying to build a team and come together and coalesce, you suddenly have to learn and care about these new characters. But in terms of the experience of transitioning from one to the other, we've just been using Discord and kind of theater of the mind, tell the story that way. I know there's some other things like Tabletop 20, which will let you actually put minis on a board that you guys can see as a screen. But that would be my suggestion. It's a great way to get started, meet people, and link up during everything going on.
That's awesome. Thank you.
I don't mean to put anybody on the spot, but Teddy, would you be willing to share about the D&D you've been playing?
Sure. So for us, it's actually been convenient to do D&D online because I'm playing with a group of people who are all somewhat based around Portland and Oregon, but there's several hours drive if you want to actually meet in person. So we've been using Roll20, so it's like an online map thing and then chatting over Discord. So in a lot of ways, it's actually been what's catalyzed us playing D&D is the pandemic, because the same group had done it before and sort of petered out, and this one's had more staying power.
Thanks. CR, did you have, what is that, your hand raised from last time, or do you have another comment? Okay. The other thing that I've been curious about, this isn't something that I participate in, but I feel like there's a lot of community, maybe people play video games on their own, but then they participate in conversations in forums or through creating memes. Is there anybody in here who like actually makes game-based memes? I'll just say the favorite one that I've seen recently is the like a crossover between two games where somebody has created the Pokemon to look like Among Us figures. They're pretty cute.
My best friend is constantly sending me game-related memes, often from Fire Emblem Three Houses, which came out like a year and a half ago, but we are really, really into. But yeah, and I know that like tons of people, I didn't play Hades because I knew that if I played it, it would take over my life, and I'm really busy. But like everyone I know was playing that, and so for a while there was this like huge thriving community of people just making jokes about and like art about Hades on the internet, and I was kind of like a little bit jealous that I wasn't part of it. I was like, this seems like a good community building activity, even though it's not a online game.
What is Hades?
Hades is like, from what I understand, and anyone can correct me because again, I have not played it. It's like a Metroid style video game. I think it's on Switch, and it has like a lot of kind of classical mythology figures, and it has like a lot of dating options, and you can be in like poly queer relationships with all these like mythological figures, but also it's like an adventure game, like platformy adventure game. It sounds really good. So.
Hey, you sort of pointed at me, Elizabeth, so I'll take that, or I assume. I'm Justin. To combine a few of the topics that people talked about, D&D, a game, definitely recognized Ted's face and Laura's face. She used to be in our D&D game, but unfortunately she is in grad school or something and busy. So definitely a great way to keep in contact with friends that live a few hours drive away from me. And speaking of online memes, it's not exactly memes, but join subreddits where they talk about the different D&D games that I'm running, and I've been watching videos on this particular D&D campaign that I'm running and see how they do it and similar. aspects about it, and I've really enjoyed that. I sort of feel like I've joined their community, even though these videos were filmed, 2 years ago. But it's been great to follow along with this group. And also, Hades is a fantastic game, sort of roguelite, I guess, is the genre that it falls under. You die, but you gain abilities to do better stuff. And
It's like a roguelite Metroidvania, right?
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Although I'd never played Metroid, so I unfortunately don't resonate with that. But I think I need to go back and do that.
Do you want to go ahead and transition into our next question, Elizabeth?
Sure. So I mentioned this briefly earlier, but just to kind of complicate the question of gaming, we've been talking about video games and games that we play via internet access. And I know that that Hani mentioned that about like disability communities often finding online gaming to be a good way of socializing even before the pandemic, and that now like more people are coming in, which is an interesting angle on accessibility in games and how that can work. And then there's also the other side of accessibility, which is often games are not particularly accessible in terms of disability, or like even in terms of just controllers, or in terms of economic access, in terms, like computers, game systems. I know like, wasn't like the PlayStation 5 just announced or something? I'm just like, who is buying new video game systems in 2020? That just, wow. But yeah, and just in terms of like steady internet access, access to a social group that you want to play games with, or that you feel safe playing games with, social enough, like the right kind of social skills to go into a group of people you don't know, like these sorts of things. So like, I guess I don't know that what the question is so much as just like, how is this whole hobby complicated by like neoliberal capitalism and like all just the detritus of that bad situation. Go ahead.
Yeah, so you're talking about like how you integrate all of those things. Is my copy of up here? It is not. I just got done reading Isabel Wilkerson's book on caste, and my particular Dungeons and Dragons session has actually been about teaching people the history of slavery and how there's so much more complexity than people would think of.
That's right.
So I think that when it comes to anything about what's going on in the world, I think there's always a way to integrate that, as long as you're having conversations with the people you're around to kind of like set some standards. One of the things that Dungeons and Dragons kind of has recently called it a session zero. I think this is something that could apply to any gaming group that you have, where literally everyone gets together and just talks about what are all the things that are acceptable to talk about, not acceptable to talk about, and also what are we interested in exploring? Are there any ideas that we have on our minds that we'd like to get into, dive into, understand? And I think games are a great place to kind of integrate those conversations as well. So now it's, well, my player's a jerk and your player's a jerk, and our jerkness can go at it. We can put that to the side, and now we can talk person to person and kind of like work through those things. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's a really good way of like bringing games beyond just the escape and just the self-care and the socializing aspect. Yeah, that's super cool.
That reminds me, someone recently told me about Nordic Larping, which is quite different from the version of LARPing in the US where people sort of like wail on each other with foam weapons. In Nordic LARPing, it sounds a little bit like reenactment, like the war reenactments that people do in the US, but not quite. They like explore sort of historical moments, so there's like an element of education mixed into them. Although they've actually taken a step back, the people who run Nordic LARPing, from running games recently because they've had issues where people have taken advantage of historical situations to sort of live out racist fantasies, or like have accidentally involved people in the game who they thought were actors but were actually real people who were just on the sidelines, not supposed to be part of the game. So obviously there's a lot of issues involved there, but games as a way to learn about history, I think that's a really interesting idea.
I also wonder if because of the pandemic, or partly because of the pandemic, and the fact that people kind of need the release and the relief that games bring, if people generally are kind of quieting the critical the critical inner voice about like how playing games can be like, you know, that it's not kind of a utopia. It still exists in this harmful system, all those other things. And like that also totally makes sense if like right now is not the time that people want to be interrogating those instincts. That's also a kind of self-care.
Speaking to the question about access and disability, as I've been doing game design this semester, I've been doing quite a bit of research on games and accessibility, mostly board games and card games. There's actually quite a bit of research about video games and accessibility, and not so much about tabletop games. I did find one resource, a website called Meeple Like Us, which is based in the UK, where I think it's just one person, but he's like slowly recruiting people to help him out with it. He rates games based on their accessibility in different categories. So for instance, visual accessibility for people who have low vision or who are colorblind, or memory requirements in different games. Is this if somebody has difficulty with memory, is this a game they can play? Or flexible intelligence, linear thinking, all these different categories. And it's been really interesting to just look at all the different rankings on games that I've played before and start thinking about gameplay in a way that I hadn't, because while I do identify as disabled, I obviously don't identify as every type of disabled. So it's illuminating to see it from different perspectives.
Have people found, because there's like less commuting now and stuff, I don't know if people have spent time listening to podcasts where people play tabletop games. Like, I don't know like all of them, but I know like Friends at the Table is one of them that I like. But I know that like for me, like my partner and I tried to start listening to a new season, but because we're not traveling anywhere, it hasn't really been able to catch on as just us putting it on in the background. I don't know if that's like another kind of source of games related content that people take advantage of or not.
Just to throw out a couple others, the Adventure Zone podcast is a fun D&D adventure. And then there's a video session one that I've been watching, but I can't remember the name of, but involves Jeff Kanata from a couple of other podcasts I listen to, / Filmcast and whatnot. But I've really enjoyed those as somebody into D&D and whatnot. I recommend them. Oh, and also it's a great way if you're interested in D&D at all to potentially see how it can be. Although of course these people are all actors and sets the bar pretty high, and to, you know, can't necessarily hold yourself to that standard.
Have to admit, I've never really understood the attraction of listening to or watching other people play games, but I know that a lot of people do like to do that, like watching Twitch streams and whatnot.
Well, in these cases, like the D&D podcast or just the tabletop podcast, like Friends at the Table, they don't play D&D, they play other role-playing games, but it's like basically improv with rules, with like dice rules. So they tell these really long narrative arc stories that they kind of like plan out loosely, and then like what actually happens depends on the rules of the game. So it can be like really, really exciting.
Also, I think if it's a game that you've played as well, I think it's just funny to see how other people react to it. That's always a fun experience.
Okay, the one that I did actually watch on YouTube when it first came out was that Octodad video game where it's somehow this guy's family doesn't realize that he's an octopus in disguise, and the whole game is based around, I think you have to move each of his tentacles separately in order to get him to do anything. That I did watch on YouTube.
I love that game.
Another one that's really, really similar to that is I Am Bread, one where you're basically trying to maneuver a piece of bread around the room and try and find different ways to toast it and you can toast it, on all sorts of different hot surfaces. But yeah, very similar to Octodad in that kind of humorous, difficult to control game.
All right, so we are getting towards the end of the hour. So if anybody has any final thoughts that they need to share with us, please do so now.
I was kind of thinking earlier when we were talking about self-care as sort of somewhat game related. I don't know if anyone else is really into puzzles, but I had, through a miracle of the YouTube algorithm, the channel Cracking the Cryptic show up on my YouTube feed back in April, and it's a fantastic Sudoku and other types of pencil puzzles channel, and I've been finding that I've been since sitting down daily, performing self-care with watching other people who are far smarter than me solve really hard puzzles, and it's been really, really wonderful. So highly recommend if anyone else is into those.
Thanks.
Complete area that hasn't come up at all during this hour is board games have actually become a big part of my dating life, because I'm spending most time just one-on-one with people, and there's only so many things that you can do right now, especially being winter and having bars closed and everything, that we've been playing a lot of board games.
What are your favorite dating board games, Chris?
Starting out people on an easier side, there's Azul, it's a nice tile drafting game. There's Small World or Clank or Stone Age, some resource management games that are simpler. Or Dominion or Seven Wonders Duel. There's some really good 2-player games.
Nice. Thanks for sharing. Okay, well, just to wrap up, thank you all so much for participating in this with us.
Thank you.
We know that people are getting Zoom fatigued at this point, and so it's a huge thing just to even take the time to get on a Zoom. Also, the collaborative document and drawing board are both still going to exist, so if people think of things that they want to share afterwards, feel free to jot them down there. And I hope I'll see you all at the Symposium events that are happening tonight and tomorrow.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.